Good morning. We're here today going to look at tips for knitting in the round. This is particularly for those of you who've tried knitting in the round with the magic loop technique, didn't really get the hang of it, and you really want to try again. So I'm going to see if I can get you enthused about it, because it's a great technique if you can get it right, if you can get the hang of it. It's amazing what it opens up, and it stops you having to seam up all the sides of everything, which personally I don't like very much. So let's have a go. I've got Jo here on the camera and she'll prompt me if I forget things. But one of the first things I want to talk about is the needles. These are actually really important. These are some old needles that I found, and I have to be honest, I don't use these anymore, and the reason is that they're not actually very good. They're very pretty, I do like the colour, but that's all I do like about them. What they don't have is this join here is actually quite rough, and it snags. I don't know if you can hear my fingernail clicking across it, and then this bit is actually quite bulbous, so particularly on some of the smaller diameter needles this bit actually becomes really sort of thick. So these needles are not great, and the thing that makes them really the worst is the cable. The cable is actually probably one of the most important things. This cable is really thick. It doesn't bend nicely. It doesn't flow and move around. So it's actually really hard to pull your knitting into a good shape with these cables. Let me show you a good set of cables. These are Knit Pro. I hope you can see straight away how much lighter and more flexible this cable is. It's much easier to work with. These have nice straight smooth joins. There is no snaggy bits here, and so these are really nice needles to work with. So first of all, get yourself some decent needles. It makes all the difference. I like to use Knit Pro. I also use these, which are Chia Goos. These are just the bestest cables ever. And there are other good ones. Addy are good. Hiya's. Those are the ones that I've heard about as being really good. Google them online. You'll get lots of reviews, people talking about them. But do get yourself something with lovely, tactile, flexible cables. The other thing that often happens with, particularly if you've got interchangeable needles, people do say, oh, but they come undone too easily. Now, it can happen, but actually the joints on most of the professional grade needles are very good, and you just need to tighten them up. So always, finger tight is not enough. You'll find they've got a little tightening hole, and you'll be given a little screw to go with them. And you put this through the hole, whoops, there. And then I like to get, this is just a little piece of scrap leather, and I hold that around, and using that and then turning on this side, you can get them nice and tight on this joint. And I have to be honest, mine do not fall apart if I've tightened them properly. If I put them on quickly and just finger tighten them, they do fall apart. So there you go. Take the time to tighten them properly and you'll be fine there. So good needles, tighten them well. If you're just starting out, have to be honest, choose a nice bit of yarn. This is dark and it's thin, and it makes it quite hard to see the stitches, so give yourself a little bit of practice before you start knitting small dark things. If you knit slightly bigger light things, it is much easier to see the stitches, and therefore it just makes the whole operation a bit easier, especially while you get your practice in. Then you can do dark things. So when we start off, now here you are, here's my little hack for starting off. So I'm just starting to knit, this could be a wrist warmer or a mitten here, and I've done a little 2 by 2 rib, so 2 purl, 2 knit. And what I'm going to do first of all is I knit 2 or 3 rows without joining it in the round. Because when you've got it, particularly if you've got a long piece with a lot of stitches on it, joining it in the round from that cast on row, it is a bit tricky. That's the reality of it, particularly as you've got to be careful that you don't get your stitches twisted, i.e. you don't want to be joining it in the round with a twist in the middle, because you then, I think it's called a Mobius. There's a mathematical term for this kind of thing. It's kind of groovy, but it doesn't really work very well for mittens. So we want to try and avoid that. Now, when you've got 3 or 4 rows, look, that's really obvious. But if you imagine that as a cast on row, it's not so obvious. It's quite difficult to check it, and so it does become potentially a bit of a problem. So my handy hint is knit yourself 3 rows to start with, and then we're going to join these in the round. At that point you will have to sew up a little bit down the bottom, but you know what, that's only going to be tiny and nobody will see it when you're done. So what I do is I put my needles on. This is just where it's just finished working, so here's my working yarn tail, and I'm going to find the halfway point. I think I did 32, so 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, so I think that's the halfway point. So what I'm going to do is pull that through. So we just pull the cable through halfway. It doesn't have to be halfway, but it probably makes your patterning easier if you do halfway. So I've split that now between the two simply by pulling a loop out on my cable, and I've got my stitches evenly on both needles. Now I always like to have them pointing to the right. My working yarn tail is coming off the back needle, and if we do this at the end of every row, then it's easy to remember this is the right side facing me as well, and I pull out the back needle and move it around. You want to pull out enough that you've got plenty of room to start working and knitting on here.
So you've got your 2 loops.
I've got 2 loops, yes, look, 1 loop, 2 loop, magic loop. That's what they call it.
Magic loops, shouldn't
It should, you're right. Yes, a magic loops plural would have been a good idea. But now I can start knitting on this front one. Now I'm just going to knit that first stitch. Don't worry about it. Look, that's really loose. Don't worry about it. Just let it be. When you get to the second stitch, put your needle in as if to knit it, and then at this point you should be able to pull that. Can you see? I'll do that again. See how you've got the gap? If you pull that, you can snug that up. So you want to be pulling so the cable is coming quite close to the needle. So pull it up so it's reasonably tight, and then just hold that tension while you complete knitting the stitch. At that point you can let it go. Look, see, it holds it. It won't slide out. So now you don't have to worry about your tension for the rest of the row. So that's the same technique you do every time you turn the corner. So it's my snugging up technique, and I'm sorry, you're just going to have to bear with me while I get to the end, because I'm going to show you again turning the corner.
And that's what stops you getting ladders, which is what a lot of people complain about.
Absolutely, yes. You get the dreaded ladder, which is where it's just not tight enough at the corners. But the snugging up will stop that happening. So we've finished that row. So when we finish that first needle, always do the same thing. Turn it round so it points to the right. You've got your working yarn tail coming off the back needle. Then you can slide this needle in. Sometimes you have to just give it a little, there we are, little push in there. So now I've got them on both needles, working tail at the back, and I pull out the back needle enough to be able to work with, pick up my yarn, and I'm ready to start knitting. Knit the first stitch, don't worry about your tension. Knit the second stitch, snug it up, and knit. Now when I say snug, I mean snug. I don't mean yank it so it's really tight, because then you'll actually find the back stitch is too tight to get back on the needle. I don't mean be a bit loose about it, because then you'll get a ladder. So it's about just snugging it up. You'll soon get the hang of it. It will feel right. It just feels nice and cozy. They're just kissing each other neatly on the needles, and it all feels quite nice. So we'll get round here. Now this one is the first one we do. You can see how this actually gets quite loose. And this is because we've only got 1 stitch there. Really don't worry about that. That's not going to be a problem. Let's have some more yarn. So having finished knitting there, I'm going to turn it round so it faces the right again. Working tail is coming off the back needle. Push the front needle back on. So you've got them both together there, and you can pull out the back yarn tail. So again, do this. This is just the stitches redistributing themselves on the needle. It's not actually that loose. But if we knit again, and then the second time we snug it up. So just when the needle is through, give it a little snug, knit it, and it's all fine. And that, if we just get round, we'll have a look at. So here you can see now. Let's slide that through. So now you've got, this is coming together and that will stay together and it'll get firmer as we go up. So when you come to making this piece up, you can see you'll have a little gap at the bottom. This will all be beautifully joined going up, but you'll have a little gap at the bottom here. So using your cast on yarn tail, you just need to sew up that little gap with a couple of stitches, and frankly that'll never be spotted in your finished mitten. And there you go, easy way to get started, easy way to carry on.
Do you want to show us a finished mitten to show us that there
I
are
could-
no ladders?
Oh yes, I could show you a finished mitten. This is a unicorn mitten. Look, I happen to have one to hand, but here you go. This is actually a 1x1 rib, but there you go. No ladders.
Don't know where you started.
Don't know where I started. Well, that would have been that's one of the edges, and you can see going up on the stocking stitch. Look, can you see there's no ladders on there. That's all snugged up. And then that would have been the cast on will be somewhere down here. Is the cast. I think that's probably the slip knot there, but you can see that it all disappears. It really does. You're not going to see it. So there you go. That's how to knitting in the round, and then you can do lovely things like unicorn mittens. Well, you can do the unicorns in the flat, but you can do the mitten in the round.
You could do the unicorn in the round as
You
well.
can do the unicorns in the round, absolutely.
Even the horn.
I think
we've got a video on that.
We
Making
have.
tiny things
Yes,
in the round.
I mean, and that is pretty teeny tiny. But that's the beauty about the magic loop technique, is you can actually do this, and it really works. And your stitches don't fall off the end of your needles. I mean, what's not to love? Anyway, have a good morning. See you soon. Bye.